figuring out our love languages and realizing how my wife understands and communicates love, she feels like she's loved when Tom helps her with the dishes in the house and when he helps with bathe the kids at home. When I do those things, my wife feels like that I really love her because of doing those things, those acts of service. She perceives love as those acts of service. The other thing is quality time. She wants my undevoted attention. And guys, undevoted attention means you're knee to knee looking at your spouse and you say, tell me how your day was. And you're just looking her right in the face. And you're listening to her. And you're not, I'm going to give you a little heads up, you're not trying to fix anything. All right? She don't want you to fix anything. She just wants you to listen. And so what you do is you sit knee to knee with her and then you say, tell me how your day was. And she then vents to you everything that's going on during that day. And you listen. And the best thing you can say at the end of it is, what can I do to help you? How can I help? And that's it. And leave it at that. I have to sit down and watch HGTV with my wife for an hour and a half every night at the end at home. That's quality time that I sit with my wife. She wants to sit on the couch and I will sit with her and we will watch her show while she's talking to me about all the things that she needs done around the house and or stuff that's going on in her life. And I spend that quality time. And I know, because that's her love language, not to say a word. I just sit there, and I didn't like HGTV when I first started watching it, but I'm a big fan now of House Hunters International, just because of sitting there watching it so much. That's her favorite show. So we sit there and we watch it, and I spend that time and I'm listening to her. Every morning I wake up and I make the coffee. Watch this, guys. Acts of service. I make the coffee. I know she takes 2 scoops of sugar and cream, and I mix it up for her, and I make my coffee, and I come into the morning, and I sit down with her, and I give her her cup of coffee, act of service, and I sit down with her, and I say, tell me about the day. Tell me how the day is going to roll out today. And I let her then have quality time with me, drinking coffee together in the morning, first thing, so that we can plan out the day and see what everything's going on or what's going to happen. I'm doing an active service and quality time in the morning, and then I purpose at the end of the evening to come home and spend quality time with her on the couch so that she can bet on how the day went. And if I do those things, guys, life is great at home. Are you with me? My wife is not in the mood to be with me in a physical sense if I'm, groping her, because my love language is physical touch. And she's not in the mood because I simply say, I love you, I love you, I love you all the time, and you look great, and this and that, and I say words, because words mean nothing to her. But when I bathe the kids, and I help clean up the kitchen, because she's overwhelmed, man, she's in the mood, huh? Hey, go figure, that's just how God wired her. And that's how He has wired all of us separately and differently. And you need to understand, in the marriage, if you want things to hit on all cylinders, you need to know what your spouse's love language is and speak to her in that language. But it is our propensity to speak in our own love language because that is what comes instinctively. It's easy for me to say words to my wife, but they don't mean much to her. It's easy for me to hug my wife, or just be hugging all over her, and she's like this. Because that doesn't float her boat. Acts of service and quality time. That's what my wife needs. That's how she perceives love. That's how she feels like she's loved. Quality time and acts of service. We see Martha here in the same thing. We see a little picture of what's going on here. Now, these 5 love languages. Let's go over them real quick. Words of affirmation. Actions don't always speak louder than words. Some of us feel most love when love is expressed verbally. Hearing words, I love you. Receiving unsolicited compliments or words of appreciation mean the world to you if this is your primary love language. Words have tremendous power to communicate love. Here's a little warning for those of you who have words of affirmation. Words of affirmation, if you have that as your primary love language, is a double-edged sword. That means if you're a spouse and you know your spouse has a love language of words of affirmation and you say a critical word, it cuts the same way. It cuts them worse because that is their love language. And so words are perceived much more deeply to them and can harm them in a much greater sense. If this is your primary love language, that's how you communicate. Ladies, guys, or women, if you have this love language, and man, she has that, and you know that that's what it is, You constantly saying things about her or him and lifting that person up is a positive thing for them. When you compliment them in front of other people, that is a huge deal for them. When you're on Facebook and you say, did you see what my spouse did today? Man, he cooked, barbecued in the yard and did this thing, and they're saying this publicly to people that is perceived as words of affirmation. That gets that person excited. They love that, words of affirmation. If you're quality time, then that's your primary love language. Nothing communicates love to you more than full, undivided attention. You feel most loved when your beloved, if you will, spends time with you, even if it's just going for a walk or sitting around together on the sofa watching HGTV. Some people spell this love language T-I-M-E, time. They need to have you there. My wife's love language, she has a dual love language like I do, but hers is quality time and acts of service. When quality time for my wife is perceived as anything that I do without her is perceived as kind of a threat to her of prioritization. That means that if I spend all my time here at the church fixing everybody else's problem, the person with the quality time as a love language will only perceive that as I am not number one in your life. That is coming before me. That you're spending time with those people to fix that problem. But what about my problems? What about my issues? If your spouse has quality time, they need to know that you are the priority in their life. When they know that, things get even better in the home. But you will have to purposely make a niche in your life to create quality time as a standard. Watch this. When I get up in the morning to make that coffee and I sit down with her, that's quality time. I'm listening to her intently, I'm spending quality time. In the evening, when I purposely sit down with her, that is quality time that belongs to her. At 8:30, when all the kids go to sleep, we spend 2 hours on the couch, hour and a half on the couch, and it's just her. I just give her that quality time. It is outside of my nature, guys. So when you speak to your spouse in their love language, they know that that's outside of your nature. My wife was raised in a family. I'm not picking on her family or anything like that. Just let me preface that. Her dad was a Vietnam vet, wounded in Vietnam at 18. He has permanent disability his whole life. He is permanently disabled. She grew up in a home where dad was home all the time. He was there to make breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And so this became an issue when we got married because her perception of what a dad's role was quality time constantly in the home. That, how come you can't be here for breakfast and lunch and dinner? How come you can't sit down at the table with us at 5 o'clock? I grew up in a very entrepreneurial household. I'm out there working and getting all the hours I possibly can to take care of my family because that's what I was taught was important. And so we had a conflict there because I said, honey, I can't be home for lunch all the time. I'm not going to be home for dinner at 5 o'clock every night all the time. That's just not how it is. In her home, they took naps during the afternoon. Like 2.5-hour naps. Like this is a big deal. She's going to get frustrated about that. But that's how they did it, and everybody stayed home. And they had this thing in the house. We're taking naps. Nobody makes any noise. In my household, we did not know what a nap was. We said, you got extra time on your hands? We got some work for you to do. And we'd go outside and we'd go do something. So, excuse me. All right. So when we first got married, and my wife said, I want you to come take a nap with me, she was saying, in effect, I want you to spend quality time with me. And I'm not wired that way. I'm words of affirmation and physical touch, so I'm sitting there in the bed, and she's laying next to me, and we're trying to take a nap, and I'm going like this, with my fingers, thinking about all the stuff that needs to be done outside, and she's laying on my arm, and as soon as I start to hear her fall asleep and drift off, I'm like trying to get my arm out from underneath her, so I could get out of the bed and go outside and do some chores. But I made myself lay down with her and spend that time with her, because she wanted quality time, and I'm not talking about guys fulfilling the marital duties of being with your wife in the biblical sense. I'm talking about she just wants your undivided attention. That's quality time. And she needed to have that. And so I needed to make the adjustments so that we could spend that quality time. So I carved that time out in the morning and the evening, quality time. If you're giving and receiving gifts, For some of us, gifts are the primary love language, and we have a few in here that are like that. Whether they're large or small, expensive or not, the visual symbol of love is what is required for that person. A gift is a way that the giver can say to the receiver, I was thinking about you, I value you. When they bring that gift home, that's what they like. A thoughtful gift communicates to that receiver that he or she is cared for, they're prized, they're cherished. And when we partake together in a time or alone, if something is brought and given to that person, they get excited about that because that meant you took time during the day to think about me, buy me something, package that thing, and bring it to me, and in their mind, that's how they perceive love. And they may not have got a lot of that going on when they were being raised, and that is something that they need, and or they saw that model for them, and that's how they perceive love to be, giving and receiving gifts. It's God's way of saying, this is how much I love you. And so we see in this gospel picture the same thing where one has acts of service as a love language, and the other one is not. And they're right. We're going to talk about that in just a second. But first, acts of service. For some of us, actions do speak louder than words, and we feel most loved, not when we hear the words, I love you, but when love is put into action. Remember the Broadway play, they made a movie about it, My Fair Lady? Anybody ever see that? I'm dating myself. Pygmalion, for those kids who studied in school. And it's about this lady who was brought up in the rough parts of the street, and she's taught all this etiquette, and she's brought along, and this guy's courting her this whole time, and she makes a statement. Liza Doolittle was her name. And she was being courted by a guy by the name of Freddie. And he writes her these love letters every single day. Every day she goes to the mailbox and there's another letter in there for her. At one point she cries out in frustration, words, words, words. I'm so sick of words. If you love me, show me. Don't talk of love lasting through time. If you love me, show me now. Acts of service. You may have some frustration in your home if your spouse is acts of service and you are words of affirmation. That was us. And I'm saying all these words all the time. And in my mind, I go to work thinking, I told my wife I love her. She knows that I love her. But in fact, because of the way she perceives love, she does not feel loved at all. And your spouse may not feel loved at all because of simply you communicating in your own love language as opposed to understanding hers and communicating in hers. The last one is physical touch. Dr. Chapman emphasizes that it isn't all about what happens in the bedroom. Though married couples is an important part of that life, but holding hands, a hug, a pat on the back, a tender touch on the shoulder or the face, all of these things are powerful expressions of loving care. The guy likes that the wife would, give him a pat on the rear end as he goes through the kitchen. So, I love you, honey. And if the guy is physical touch, he's like, hey. And he's he's excited about that. He gets excited about that, and that's all you had to do. My wife was thinking, man, if that's all I needed to know that I had to do, it would have been great. And we had to work through some things and try to figure out how to communicate to each other. So now every morning, because I go there and I make coffee in the morning, and I know it's 2 scoops of sugar and cream, and that's what she needs in her coffee, acts of service, and I'm going to go sit down with my wife and spend quality time for her in the morning, and then I'm going to purpose to come back in the evening and spend quality time and watch HGTV, whether I like it or not, and listen to her and tell me about her day, because I need to know she has built into her time frame in the morning that when she wakes up, she comes over to me, and in the kitchen while I'm preparing coffee, doing the act of service, she comes up to me and she gives me a hug and holds me. And she just holds me for a long time. And man, I love that. Because that's my love language, physical touch. She's saying, I love you. And she's holding on to me. Now guys, don't get carried away and say, just understand that they're speaking in a language that's not their own. They're purposing to show you that you're cared for. And if both people in the marriage are doing this, and I've counseled people who've been married for 30 years, and they come in and they say, we're struggling. And we're thinking about divorce. We're struggling. He doesn't communicate well. He doesn't, here's one I hear all the time. He doesn't understand me. Here's another one I hear all the time. We fell out of love. I thought I loved her, but I don't think we're in love anymore. Those are simply not true. What has happened is you stop communicating. You see, in the courting part of the relationship, in the early part of the relationship, you're just giddy and man, you're doing everything. You've got that book, 101 Ways to Say I Love You, that you picked up at Walmart or whatever, and you're looking at it and say, get her flowers, gifts. Send her a card. And you're seeing other things. Take her out on a picnic. Acts of service. It's quality time. And you're going through these things and you're hitting on all cylinders on every single love language, even though it's outside of yourself, because your goal is to nail down that relationship. You want to be with that person and you want that relationship. So you're doing everything that is outside of you to do to win her heart. And then when you get married, it's like, well, you fall into default mode, and default mode is your own love language. And you're doing it in your mind, you're saying I love you, but in her mind, it may not be that. So when you're saying I love you because yours is words of affirmation, she is not hearing it anymore. She's reminiscing about the picnics up at LSU Lakes that you used to take her on to. She's reminiscing about the quality time or the acts of service or the help that you had around the home. So we see in the scripture all of these things. And physical touch, being the last one, is you need to know that it's a two-edged sword. So if you say something negative to your spouse, that cuts them just as deep because you're using their love language to hurt them. And that's why it's very important that if you have a spouse whose love language is words of affirmation, that you really are careful with what you say. Because your critical nature, if you have a critical nature, can be damaging to that relationship. I see, if I look at statistically marriages that fall apart, is a person who has a critical nature who's married to a person who has words of affirmation. Those marriages never last. Because he's constantly getting cut by those words. And he's not feeling love. Now, they can turn those things around, and you can turn it around and make it work. But it's going to take purposeful effort. Let's look at what the scripture says. So, it's not hard to figure out what Mary's main love language is. Mary, that I'm referring to, of course, is the sister of Martha and Lazarus here in the scripture that we read. When you look at them through the prism of those 5 love languages, it's obvious that Martha's primary love language is acts of service. Serving was her way of showing and presumably receiving love. She was making the dinner. She was doing those things. She was doing an act of service. I want you to catch something, church. When you have your love language ingrained in your mind and you see somebody doing something other than what your love language is, guess what? You perceive that as being something shallow or not meaningful. If you're married to that person, you could look at that and say, I'm not understanding that. So in the interactions of a church, when you see the people who are interacting, when I look around and I see us, let's meet and greet each other and shake hands, and everybody starts shaking hands, and they're joining together and they're shaking. Some people are hugging. Some people are giving the biblical kiss on the cheek that Scripture tells us about. They're doing all those things, and some people are like this. You know, they don't want you within their personal space. That's just not their love language. Some people are saying positive things. Man, you look good today. I like the way that blouse looks on you. And they're saying those kinds of things, words of affirmation. Some people will lock you down and they just start, maybe you met that person, you're going around shaking hands with somebody, and then they just lock you down and they just are standing there talking to you the whole time. Everybody's shaking hands and they're not letting you go. They're holding your hands and they're talking to you. And they said, yeah, so this is what happened in my week. And they start telling me about what's happening in their whole week. And they're not going to let go of my hands because it's quality time. This may be the first quality time that this person had all week. And so they're just locked in and they don't want to let you go. Words of affirmation, acts of service. Hey, let me get that for you. Hey, let me help you clean up the donut mess back there. And those kind of, oh, hey, Pastor, let me help pass those things out. And so they took the stack of things that we were doing and they went out and they started passing around for us. And in my mind, I'm looking at that person and saying, that's acts of service. They're out there handing them out because that's what they want to do. They are showing appreciation and love by doing that thing. And so as we look at all these things and we look at each other, oftentimes as Christians, when we see somebody and they're saying, I do love you, by saying, man, that blouse looks nice on you today. Words of affirmation. But you're like acts of service. You're like this. Thanks. But it really just didn't mean much to you. And so our reaction oftentimes to some people can be negative. Not necessarily purposefully so, but it just doesn't mean or doesn't hold a lot of water with us. And in the marriage relationship, it's the same way. Now we see Mary in the scripture here, and she was a little different. She wasn't wired the same way as her sister. Mary's two primary love languages were quality time and giving and receiving gifts. While Martha showed her love for Jesus by going all out to serve him with a special dinner, according to Luke chapter 10, Mary wanted nothing more than just to be with Jesus and sit at his feet. She showed her love and devotion to Jesus by sitting there at his feet and listening to his teaching, but that wasn't all. She got this expensive nard and she put it all over his feet, and she anointed his feet with this thing and gave him a gift. And when we look at the text there in John chapter 12, the clock is ticking. It's the day before Jesus would make his entrance into Jerusalem that this story appears. And on that day, there's going to be a ton of hosannas and all these things about how great he is and the applause from the crowd. His crucifixion is less than a week away according to this time in the scripture. Time is winding down. Mary seemed to understand better than anyone, better than Peter, James, and John, and the rest of the disciples, that Jesus was about to die. She was more spiritually discerning than any of these guys. She understood what was about to happen because she had sat at the feet of Jesus and taken his teaching to heart. She got it. And she decided to do something to express her love and her devotion to Jesus. She did it by giving him a gift. An unexpected gift, an extravagant gift. She showed her love in that way. Well, her sister standing on the outside who saw this, and some of the other disciples who were looking at it, looked at it like this, said, well, that's ridiculous. What are you doing? You just wasted a bunch of money. We could have used that for something else. Do you ever hear that in the church? Why are they doing that? That's a waste of money. We could have done something for something. Why are we feeding those kids? They're not going to come to our church ever. Why are we going to go waste money doing that? Let's spend it, something where we can be a little bit more useful in it that affects us. Here's why. Because Jesus practiced all 5 of those love languages. And his concern was for the lost. His concern was that people would come to know him in a very special way. You see, he spoke to people wherever he went about God's love for them. He showed his love for people by spending time with them as a way of saying, you matter to me. He understood the power of touch, whether it was with children or people dealing with diseases of all kinds. Jesus used the power of touch to bring healing and to communicate his love. He did it all the time. He demonstrates his love through acts of service. From healing the sick to feeding the crowds of the 5,000. And he expressed his love for lost sinners by giving the ultimate gift, the gift of himself, the gift of his own life. And when he suffered and died for us on a wooden cross with spikes driven through his hands and feet, we see a picture of extravagant love that we can't even imagine. Isaiah 53:5. The prophet eloquently says about extravagant love. He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him. And by his wounds stripes we are healed. You may know the story of a boy whose sister was diagnosed with the same disease he had and recovered from it 2 years earlier that he had had. His sister needed a blood transfusion from someone who had previously beaten the disease. And since the brother and sister had the same rare blood type, he was the ideal donor. When the doctor asked if he would give his blood to his sister, the boy hesitated. His lower lip began to tremble. And then he said, "Since it's for my sister, I'll do it." So the nurse inserted the needle into his arm, and he watched as the blood flowed through the tube. And when it was almost over, the boy said, according to this historical medical document, "Doctor, when am I going to die?" At that point, the doctor realized why the boy had hesitated and why his lip was trembling. Because the little boy thought in his mind that he was going to give up his life to save his sisters. And he chose to do so. He thought giving his blood to his sister meant giving up his own life. And in that moment, he had made a life and death decision. And it was his act of love for his sister. The boy, of course, didn't die. He didn't have to die to help save her life. And every one of us, though, has a condition more serious and more deadly than this little girl's, is understanding that we are all sinners and fall short of the glory of God. And that the only thing that can save us is what Christ accomplished on the cross. We all have a love language, and how we communicate it is important in your marriage. It's also important among the brethren, and it's also important to those little boys and little girls outside of these walls and those people and those families who are suffering from the same condition that you and I have. And that the only thing that can fix it is the purposeful action of love that Christ commanded us to do. That transfusion of life and the knowledge of who Jesus Christ is. Let's stand together. As Gary comes, as their team plays softly, I don't know where